Walk away quietly, Lane. You were never built for this table. Keen Vo, 44-year-old husband of Lane Arden Vo and chief executive of Vo Development Group, said it in the entrance hall of Hartfield Manor while his mother stood at the top of the staircase watching like she had rehearsed the moment for years. He was holding a sealed legal envelope. Beside him stood Ginevra Vo, 68-year-old matriarch and controlling trustee of the Vo Family Residential Trust, dangling Lane's house keys between two fingers as if she had already decided they belonged to someone else. Lane Arden Vo, 37-year-old wife of Keen and daughter of the late Cormac Arden, stood in the center of the marble foyer with one packed travel bag at her feet and evening rain pressing against the tall front windows. She had spent 11 years building a quiet life inside that house and a quieter one inside the company attached to it. She had calmed vendors when Keen's contracts ran over budget. She had smoothed over client complaints before they became lawsuits. She had personally covered delayed payroll disbursements 3 times from accounts no one in the Vo family knew existed, because she could not watch workers miss Christmas because of her husband's pride. None of that was mentioned tonight. Cassidy Renault, 32-year-old brand strategist of Vo Development Group, and the woman Keen had been careful not to mention by name in the last 8 months, stood near the parlor doorway wearing Lane's grandmother's garnet brooch. It had been sitting in Lane's vanity drawer that morning. Cassidy touched it once deliberately and smiled. Some women know how to take a room, others just know how to haunt one. Lane looked at the brooch. Then she looked at Keen. He looked at the floor. Ginevra descended 3 steps with the careful dignity of a woman who had always believed wealth made cruelty elegant. The Vo Trust controls this property, Lane. Your presence here was always conditional on the marriage. Since the marriage is ending by Keen's election, the trustees are requesting that you vacate tonight. Lane heard the legal phrasing. She had heard language like that before, in her father's offices, in boardrooms, in rooms where people practiced making cruelty sound like paperwork. Colvin Nash, 55-year-old Vo family attorney, stepped forward from behind Ginevra and placed a folder on the entry table. The settlement package will be served formally tomorrow morning. Tonight is simply about the property. Lane said nothing. She picked up her travel bag. She did not ask for more time. She did not beg for an explanation. Dawes, 71-year-old estate manager of Hartfield Manor, and one of the few people in that house who had ever spoken to Len, with calculating what she was worth first, stepped quietly from the side hall. His face was tight with something he was not allowed to say in front of Ginevra. When he reached Lane, he murmured against her ear, "The winter receipts, all of them, I kept copies." She gave him the smallest nod. At the front door, Cassidy's voice followed her. "I'll take good care of everything here, don't worry." Lane paused with her hand on the door. She did not turn around. "I wasn't worried," she said. "I was watching." Then the door opened, and the rain took her. The hotel room was nothing. 1 bed, a laminate desk, a heating unit that rattled. Lane sat on the edge of the mattress with her travel bag unopened at her feet and the sealed settlement envelope in her hands. She had been a Vo for 11 years. She had learned the company's financial patterns before Keen had. She had watched her father Cormac Arden teach her the same things at a different table, his conference room at Arden Capital Partners, the private commercial lending firm he had built from a regional office into one of the Southeast's quiet powerhouses. He had shown her loan covenant schedules when she was 22. He had told her how to read collateral risk when she was 25. And when he died, he had left her, the thing most people never thought to protect, before marriage took their name away from them. Controlling interest, through the Arden Family Trust, in her maiden name, in a firm that, as of the previous quarter, held the primary construction financing and revolving credit line for Vo Development Group, her husband's company. Cormac had been clear about one thing in the year before their wedding. He sat across from Lane in his office with afternoon light across the desk, and he said, "A man who loves you will protect you when he does not know what you own. A man who only needs you will only value you when he finds out. Learn the difference before the ring is on." She had believed she had. Now she was less sure. She opened the settlement envelope on the desk. The language was organized and precise. Lane was to waive all claims against Vo Development Group. She was to waive residency rights at Hartfield Manor. She was to sign a comprehensive confidentiality agreement. She was not to contact current employees. She was to accept a modest transitional sum and remove herself from the story. Then, one paragraph stopped her. Wife acknowledges she holds no direct, indirect, or beneficial interest in any lending institution, capital partner, or credit provider connected to or doing business with VO Development Group and permanently waives any right to review, challenge, or act upon records related to such obligations. She read it twice, then again. She had never mentioned Arden Capital to Keen's attorneys. She had never mentioned it to his board. She had never mentioned it to anyone in the VO orbit. The only people who knew were the ones at Arden Capital itself, bound by fiduciary discretion, and Cormac's estate attorneys, who had designed the trust precisely so that a future spouse's legal team could not find it without her consent. Which meant someone had been looking. Which meant they already suspected something. Lane placed the document face down on the desk. She opened her phone and found the contact she had not called in 2 years. Bridget Thane, 50-year-old divorce attorney and private litigation strategist, had handled 3 sensitive matters for Cormac Arden before his death. She was not warm in the way people expected attorneys to be. She was precise, she was fast, and she did not show emotion in rooms where emotion could be used against her client. She arrived 40 minutes later with a leather folio and no apology for the hour. She read the settlement in 6 minutes. Then she turned back to the lender clause and set her finger on it. "This language," she said, "does not belong in a divorce agreement." Lane looked at her. "I know. It belongs in a fraud containment document. Someone is trying to cut off a line of inquiry before you know what question to ask." Lane folded her hands on the desk. "Then we ask before they can clean the answer." Bridget studied her. "Before I can do anything, I need full disclosure. Every asset, every trust, anything connected to Keen's company or its lenders." Lane opened her secure tablet. The Arden Capital Partners' internal portal glowed softly in the dim hotel light. She turned the screen toward Bridget without explanation. Bridget read it. "Controlling beneficiary, Arden Family Trust, Lane Arden." She was quiet for several seconds. "Does Keen know?" she finally asked. "He knows my father founded Arden Capital," Lane said. "He believes the controlling interest was sold to outside investors after my father died." A pause. "He assumed that because he never asked." "And you never told him?" "My father told me never to announce what I owned to someone before I understood what they respected." Lane looked at the dark window. "I thought I was being careful. Now I think I was only being patient." Bridget closed the folio. "Then we use the patience." She pulled out a legal pad. "Record preservation notice goes out first. Then we find what your husband's people tried to hide from the lender and from you." Piers Dawes had worked at Hartfield Manor for 23 years. He had served Ginevra before Keen took the company. He had served the estate through Lane's entire marriage, and for 11 years he had watched Lane fill the gaps that Keen and Ginevra left open, quietly, without credit, without complaint. 2 days after Lane's departure, he brought a cloth bag to Bridget's office. Inside were photocopies of the estate's winter maintenance ledgers, vendor correspondence, and payroll correction files going back 8 years. Beside each correction, in Lane's handwriting, covered through personal account, "Do not flag. Staff advance. Private relief. Close quietly." Bridget set the pages across the conference table. "You paid this out of your own money, not company accounts?" "I couldn't use company funds. Keen would have seen it as interference." Lane looked at the pages without expression. "So I used my own and let him take the quarterly credit." Bridget photographed every page without comment. Then O'Delly arrived. Oddle, 64-year-old senior housekeeper at Hartfield Manor, and the woman who had kept the estate running on Lane's quiet instructions for over a decade, carried a second folder inside her coat. She did not sit down. She set the folder on the table and opened it herself. "I found these in the East office," she said. Her voice was controlled, but her jaw was tight. "Brand strategy files from Cassidy Renault's firm." Inside were invoices, a private apartment's interior staging coded as client entertainment suite, designer wardrobe coded as brand campaign samples, private travel coded as regional site visits, a jewelry purchase including a garnet brooch coded as executive gift samples. Bridget turned the pages slowly. "She was billing VO Development for her entire personal life," Lane said. Her voice was flat and quiet. "On borrowed money. On money this company borrowed from my father's firm." At Arden Capital Partners, the risk department had already flagged the VO Development file 3 weeks before Lane's removal from Hartfield. Anya Morse, 43-year-old chief risk officer at Arden Capital and one of the few executives who understood the full structure of the Arden Family Trust, had presented preliminary findings to outside compliance counsel. The numbers were not good. Keen had drawn on the construction credit facility 4 times beyond the renewal threshold. Collateral schedules had been submitted twice with inflated project valuations. Board authorizations showed irregular signature patterns on 2 approval forms, and a personal guarantee renewal submitted 3 months prior bore a co-signatory line that did not match any prior authorization on record. Lane Arden Vo. Anya called Lane on a Wednesday morning. "We are not asking you to intervene in your husband's credit review, but we need your identity confirmed in connection with a questioned document." Lane had already seen it. Bridget had obtained a copy through outside counsel. She sat in the conference room and looked at the signature for a long time. The letters were close. Whoever had practiced it had been careful. But the capital A in Arden had a particular interior loop. Her father had taught her to write it as a double stroke, closed at the top. This one was open, a left-handed imitation of a right-handed habit. "My father used to say," Lane told the handwriting expert 2 days later, "that a forged name always knows how to look like you. It just doesn't know how to remember you." The expert's written report was thorough. The document was not authentic. Bridget filed a formal record preservation notice the same afternoon. Then she sent a copy to Colvin Nash with one cover note. "My client declines to sign any settlement agreement pending full financial discovery and document authentication review." Colvin called within the hour. His voice was controlled but unsteady. "This is an overreach." "The lender clause was an overreach," Bridget said. "We are simply asking the questions it implied we should not ask." The mediation was held in a rented conference suite downtown. Keene arrived first with Colvin and Baxter Hume, 48-year-old chief financial officer of Vo Development Group, who looked like a man who had not slept properly in 2 weeks. Ginevra came in behind them in pale grey, composed and deliberate. Cassidy walked in last, standing just inside the doorway as if she had every right to frame herself in it. She was still wearing the garnet brooch. Bridget noticed it. She did not say anything yet. Keene settled into his chair and looked across the table at Lane with the practiced patience of a man performing reasonableness. "I know this is difficult, but you have to be realistic. You built nothing here. We're offering a clean exit." Bridget opened her folio. "Mr. Vo, did your wife ever contribute personal funds to support Hartfield Manor's staff or Vo Development Group during financial shortfalls?" Keene's expression tightened. "No." Bridget wrote it down. She turned to Ginevra. "Mrs. Vo, same question." Ginevra folded her hands. "Lane contributed to the household in ways appropriate to a domestic role. Nothing material." Bridget wrote that down too. Then she looked at Cassidy. "Miss Renault, were any company funds used for your personal expenses? Housing, wardrobe, travel, jewelry?" Cassidy's smile was smooth. "Of course not." Bridget set her pen down. "I see." She opened a second folder and slid copies down the table. Invoices, each with a handwritten code in the upper corner. "Then perhaps you can explain why your initials appear across 38 company expense filings over 14 months. The room went quiet in a particular way, not surprised, but trapped. Keene turned to look at Cassidy. Cassidy looked at Colvin. Colvin said, "This is irrelevant to the divorce settlement." Bridget smiled without warmth. "Your settlement tried to block my client from reviewing lender records. That is what made everything relevant." Baxter stood. "I want to speak with counsel privately." Keene grabbed his arm. "Sit down." Baxter did not sit. He looked at Lane, then at the door. "I'll cooperate with whatever review Arden Capital needs," he said at once clearly and moved to the far wall. Ginevra's voice dropped. "Baxter." Baxter did not look at her. "The forgery is not something I can stand behind." That word settled in the room like a stone dropped into still water. Keene's voice went quiet. "Lane, don't do this." Lane looked at him for the first time all morning. "You told me not to fight people bigger than me." Her voice did not rise. "You were never bigger than me, Keene. You just had more noise." 2 mornings later, Keene Vo walked into Arden Capital Partners expecting to negotiate an extension. He brought Colvin, Ginevra, and Cassidy. He wore a dark suit and the practiced ease of a man who still believed his name opened rooms. The executive boardroom was already arranged. Binders at every chair, screens lit. The words Vo Development Group, Emergency Borrower Risk Review on the wall display in sharp black letters. Anya Moore stood at the head of the table. Keene scanned the faces, risk analysts, outside compliance counsel, independent directors. He did not see Lane. Then the door behind him opened. Lane walked in wearing a charcoal blazer and no jewelry, no brooch, no wedding band, no trace of Hartfield Manor on her at all. Every Arden Capital officer stood. Anya said, "Good morning, Ms. Arden." Keene turned slowly. The practiced confidence left his face first, then the color. Cassidy's hand slipped from his sleeve. Ginevra stared at Lane the way a person stares at something that has just rearranged the furniture of their entire understanding. Lane walked to the open chair at the head of the table and sat down. Anya addressed the room. Controlling beneficiary of the Arden Family Trust, Lane Arden, holds majority ownership of Arden Capital Partners. Due to the conflict of interest created by her marriage to the borrower, she has recused herself from all direct credit decisions. This review is conducted by independent directors, outside compliance counsel, and risk management. She is present today solely for identity confirmation in connection with a questioned document submitted under her name. Roark, 58-year-old outside banking counsel hired to run the review without influence from any party, opened his binder. Vo's development group is in material default on 3 covenant thresholds. Collateral schedules submitted for renewal reflect valuations we cannot certify. A personal guarantee renewal bearing a co-signatory name we cannot authenticate was submitted 3 months ago. Loan proceeds show expenditure patterns inconsistent with stated business purposes. A chart appeared on the screen. Cassidy's initials, 38 line items, the garnet brooch listed under executive gift client relations. She was wearing it in this room. Keane looked at the screen, then at Lane. His voice had lost its performance. You could have told me. Lane looked at the binder in front of her. You could have asked. She let a moment pass. You signed the premarital disclosure documents 11 years ago. The Arden Family Trust was listed on the first page. You laughed and said my father was paranoid about paperwork. She looked up. He was protecting me from exactly this room. Ginevra's composure cracked. You deceived this family. Lane turned to her once, calm, direct and final. I gave this family 11 years to show me who it was before it knew what I owned. Ginevra had no answer for that. Roark read the recommended actions. Arden Capital would freeze all discretionary access to the revolving credit facility immediately. Emergency restructuring was declined. The question guarantee document would be referred to outside legal review. Collateral enforcement proceedings would begin per the loan agreement terms. The Hartfield Manor-backed credit line, which Ginevra had extended without informing the full board to cover the company's last major expansion, would be placed under default review. Keane pushed back from the table. If you freeze the credit, the Meridian project collapses. There are 200 workers on that site. Lane looked at him. Then you were already collapsing. I was simply the only one not allowed to say so. She signed the conflict disclosure authorization. Roark notarized it. Anya stamped the review record. Keane remained in his chair after the others began gathering their things. He looked at Lane, the way a person looks at something they destroyed before they understood what it was worth. I thought you had nothing, he said. Lane stood. She straightened her jacket. She reached for her father's pocket watch, which she had placed at the corner of the table at the start of the meeting, a habit the way some people kept water nearby. She closed her hand around it. I know, she said. That was your only mistake. Vo Development Group filed for debt restructuring within 3 weeks. The Meridian project was suspended. 2 subcontractors initiated breach claims. A second lender issued a cross-default notice after learning Arden Capital had opened a fraud review. The Hartfield Manor credit line, which no one outside the executive team had known about, became public in the bankruptcy disclosure. Ginevra had pledged it without informing the board. Hartfield went under receivership review. A court-appointed officer arrived with a clipboard and a formal notice, and Ginevra stood in the entrance hall. The same hall where she had held Lane's keys between 2 fingers, with no one left to give orders to. Piers opened the front door for the officer. Ginevra told him to turn the man away. I can't do that, Piers said. His voice was gentle but clear. Those instructions don't come from you anymore. Cassidy's business arrangement unwound faster than her confidence. The expense claims were authenticated and submitted as part of the borrower misconduct referral. An investor representative sat across from her in a conference room and read every invoice aloud. When he asked who had authorized the expenditures, she looked toward Keane's side of the room. Keane wasn't there. The garnet brooch was returned to Bridget Thane's office by courier 3 days later, wrapped in tissue inside a padded envelope. No note. Bridget handed it to Lane without ceremony. Lane held it for a moment. It had belonged to her grandmother. It had never belonged to that house, and placed it in her coat pocket. The divorce was finalized on a Tuesday. The court recognized Keane's financial misconduct, rejected the confidentiality clause, and allowed the lender documentation to inform the asset division proceeding. Lane left the courthouse in the same charcoal blazer she had worn to the Arden Capital meeting. She established a worker transition fund through the Arden Family Foundation the following week. severance assistance, job placement support, emergency household grants for the construction workers suspended when the Meridian project halted. She did it without a press release. She did it because 200 people had shown up to work every morning, trusting a company name, and they deserved not to carry the bill for the people who had run it into the ground. Dara Shaw, 26-year-old junior accountant at Vo Development, who had sat at her desk with red eyes trying to hide payroll reports she was ashamed of, found a new position through the program. She sent Lane a handwritten note. Lane read it once, folded it carefully, and kept it. Keane called 4 times. She did not answer. Bridget handled every message. Once, in the 3rd week, he appeared outside Bridget's building. He stood on the sidewalk looking smaller than Lane remembered, not physically, but in the way of a man whose certainty has finally caught up with his behavior. Bridget allowed Lane 5 minutes in the lobby, near the security desk. Keane looked at her with the expression of a man who had rehearsed this conversation and then lost the script. "I built something real," he said, "before all this." Lane considered him for a moment. She thought about the winter payroll files, the vendor calls she had taken before Keane knew they existed, the project margins she had quietly corrected before quarterly reviews, the 11 years of unremarked work that had kept his name from appearing in exactly the kind of coverage it appeared in now. "You did," she said, "and then you chose not to protect it." He opened his mouth. Nothing useful came out. "You told me not to fight people bigger than me," Lane said, "but you were never the biggest thing in that room, Keane. You were only the loudest." She picked up her bag from the lobby chair. "I wasn't fighting. I was waiting for the right table." She walked out. He did not follow. Months later, after the legal proceedings had reduced the marriage to a file number and the Vo name had become something people said in a lower voice, Lane returned to Hartfield Manor once. Not to reclaim it, not to walk the rooms in satisfaction. She went because the receivership needed her signature to release unpaid estate wages from a trust account. Ginevra had overlooked in the asset freeze, wages owed to Odile, to Piers, to 6 others who had worked through the final months without knowing the floor beneath them was giving way. The entrance hall was quieter than she remembered. The chandelier still hung. The portraits, the staircase, the marble floors she had once paid to resurface after Keane called the estimate excessive. The house looked exactly as it always had. It had simply stopped pretending. Odile met her near the door. Her eyes were bright. She started to say Mrs. Vo and then caught herself. "Miss Arden," she said softly. Then Lane. "Lane is fine," Lane said. Piers stood near the entry table. He looked at her with the expression of a man who had spent 23 years watching things happen and had only now been given permission to say what he thought of them. "Most of the staff stayed through the end," he said. "They stayed because of you. I want you to know that." Lane looked around the hall, at the space where she had stood with one travel bag while the rain came down and Cassidy wore her grandmother's brooch, and Keane looked at the floor. She did not feel what she had expected to feel. Not triumph, not grief. Something cleaner than both, the specific clarity that arrives when a long pretense finally ends and you are left standing in the honest shape of things. She signed the authorization documents at the entry table. Then she walked back through the front door for the last time. Outside, the air was cool and sharp. She stood at the bottom of the stone steps and looked back at Hartfield once. It was a beautiful house. It had always been. It just had never been hers. She took her father's pocket watch from her coat and pressed it between her palms the way she had since childhood when she needed to remember something important. Then she put it away and walked to the car. That evening, Lane returned to Arden Capital after closing. The marble lobby was still. The elevator carried her to the executive floor. She walked to the boardroom, turned on the lights, and stood inside the empty room. The binders were gone. The screens were dark. Keane's nameplate had been removed from the table. She set her father's pocket watch on the polished surface. The same watch he had carried for 40 years, the same one he had laid on his own desk the afternoon he showed her what a covenant breach looked like and why it mattered. He had told her that ownership was not a weapon. It was a responsibility. That power held honestly was harder than power held loudly, but it was the only kind that lasted. She had tried to keep that distinction through 11 years of marriage. She had stayed away from Keane's credit decisions because she wanted the record clean. She had covered the staff shortfalls from her own accounts because she did not want what she owned to become a punishment. And when they handed her the envelope and the keys and the rain, she had not reached for what was hers to destroy them. She had reached for it to stop covering for the destruction already in progress. There was a difference. It mattered to her that there was a difference. Anya appeared in the doorway. The transition fund disbursements all cleared today, every worker account funded. Lane nodded. Good. Anya hesitated. Are you all right? Lane looked at the city lights through the tall windows for a long moment. Then she said the honest thing. I'm becoming all right. That's enough for tonight. Anya left her to it. Lane picked up her father's watch, turned off the boardroom light, and walked out into the quiet corridor. Some women do not find their power after betrayal. Some women spend years making sure their power is careful enough, clean enough, fair enough, so that when the people they loved finally forced the question, the record could answer without rage. That was the kind of strength no one saw coming, because it had been there the whole time.